And so would you please give Ellie a really warm welcome as Nigel comes to interview her.
All hail. Ellie, you're so welcome, and thank you for coming.
Very kind.
We should just explain, actually, on the publicity, John was going to come as well, and unfortunately, John couldn't make it. I'm not John, I'm just going to ask the questions.
Can I explain why John? It's not that he didn't want to come.
Yes.
He so wanted to come.
He took one look at us and decided that was...
He's deeply disappointed, and he's drawn the short straw, because our James had surgery on Monday, major surgery, and he's staying with us to, recover, and which is probably a questionable pursuit in our house anyhow, but he's down there recovering, but we couldn't both leave him at the same time quite yet. So John, darling man, volunteered and said that he would do that, and I'm doing this. So I won. I got the best of it. But he's really sends his love and is terribly, because we had so look forward to doing this together, so it was disappointing.
We're just glad we've got you.
Yes,
and,
that's true.
What we thought we would do, Ellie is going to... Oh, I see. That's happening, is it? Okay. What we thought... I'll sit up now, and if we're going to be on camera. We have rejigged our day slightly. We were going to do this afternoon. What we're going to do is we're going to chat for about half an hour, and then the trustees are going to rejoin us, and then Ellie is going to teach with some time for ministry. Then we'll have a tea break, as Claire said, and then we will worship together and pray together for our region and other things. So I get the chance to interview Ellie. I've heard her speak a number of times, known her a long time. Most of us here, I'm guessing, are part of a Vineyard church somewhere along the line. Maybe you've been in a Vineyard church for a long time, maybe for a short time. As we've always said, we don't believe there's anything particularly special about the Vineyard or better than any other church, but we have been called by God to do what we do. And I've heard actually John say, we are but a vegetable in the stew. We did it as Paul in our church. We taught on this last year, and Paul said, well, so if we're going to be, if you know you're a carrot, why wouldn't you try and be the best carrot you could ever be? So we are a vegetable in the stew. But I'm guessing that some of us here would have heard some of John and Ellie's story, but I'm guessing that some of us won't have. And I actually think that probably none of us would be here if it hadn't been for you and John doing what you did, pioneering church planting with Vineyard back in the late 80s. And so I'd just love to ask you a little bit about that. Is that okay? Sure. So just tell us a little bit about how you and John actually got involved with these crazy Californians, and how you ended up sort of bringing it back here.
Well, looking back, it was quite an adventure. But I need to say right up front, people will say, oh, that was so wonderful, those were the glory days, blah, 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 blah. Quite frankly, they were wonderful days, but those were then and this is now. So we are for the now, honestly. But now and again, it's worth looking back and saying what brought us to this point. And of course, the scriptures are full of remember and remind them and take to heart and all that stuff. So this is a little bit of that. John was ordained in Salisbury Cathedral in 1977 or something, and we then got engaged, having been secretly engaged for nearly 4 years.
Oh, wow.
What a laugh that was. So, for reasons best known to the Lord alone, we were engaged secretly for 4 years.
I never knew that about you.
Didn't you?
Secret engagement, wow.
It was very romantic.
The
and
plot
if John were here, you know what he would say? He said, we were engaged for 4 years and we married as virgins, just. I've heard him say it publicly. And we did. 'Twas a triumph. So we did know each other and love each other very much as we married, which was a wonderful start to things, actually. And then we worked in 2 Anglican parishes, one down in Dorset, in Canterbury Magna, which we loved, and then another one in St Michael's, Chester Square. And one of the friends who was John's PA only happens to have turned up here today. I mean, how fun is this? You know, what goes around comes around. So it was, they were wonderful times. And during the time that we were there, We just finished at Canford, and John had 3 weeks sabbatical. And he wanted to go to a church on the east coast of the States where they were having some sort of conference. He'd heard about this man. He wanted to go and meet. And just before he left, we'd been doing a university mission at Oxford with David Watson, the name you may know. And David Watson said to John, "Don't come back from America, John, until you've been to California and met this man called John Wimber. I have just been to see his church." They worked together at Fuller. On the staff there. And David said, "This is the thing closest that I've ever seen to the New Testament." And John was sort of allured by that and thought, that must be good because we've got some wonderful churches over here. So anyway, he did his conference and then he flew west with a telephone number in his pocket. That's all he had. It's so not John. And he was the Englishman abroad, so he had a jacket and tie, little umbrella and a suitcase. And he landed in California expecting to blend. I ask you, I mean, it was ridiculous. So he got to the airport and he rang the number and they said, "Proceed to the Disneyland Hotel." We thought this was getting stranger by the day. So he got to the Disneyland Hotel. They put him up for the night. The church paid for him to stay at the hotel for a night, and there was a jacuzzi, never heard of it. Being a jacuzzi, decided that the God was with him. And the next day, turned up at the church, and they hosted him. And he went to house groups every evening, and he saw things he'd never thought to see. And he had worship that he never thought to hear. And he was absolutely blown away by it all. He went to his first house group, and sitting there like this, he said, "You could have taken the chair away. I'd have still been like that." He was so nervous. And suddenly the woman next to him flipped backwards, over the back, just lay out on the floor. This is really strange. So this happened quite a lot for 3 or 4 days. And then he got a message from Wimber saying, come and have lunch with me. And so John turned up. And the first thing he said to him was, "Mr. Wimber, I am so embarrassed to be here because I wrote to you to say, might I come? Because I've just transgressed all my, etiquette boundaries." He said, "I did write, but you obviously didn't get my letter." And Wimber said to him, "Oh, no, John, we got your letter." And we looked at him and we said to ourselves, we think this could be the Lord, and if he turns up, it will be. That was how the Vineyard for us began. It was that extraordinary. And John, of course, then relaxed and had a marvellous time. And he got close to Wimber very quickly. They became dear friends. And Wimber said to him, "John, I've read all your charismatics. I've read all your English stuff. I love Michael Green. I love David Watson. I love Michael Harp. All these names. He'd been everywhere, done everything. Loved it. He had a great love for the Anglican Church. But he said, I suppose what we do here is we believe it all, but actually we do it. We actually do what we're learning." And my John would then go on to say, "And we can teach other people how." And so and then we came, basically, to cut a long story short, we commuted over the Atlantic several times, backwards and forwards. Our wonderful vicar in London let us. And at one point, we were with Wimber, and we went as audience to one of his television broadcasts. I mean, we were just groupies. We'd go everywhere. Every time the door opened, we were there. Every meeting, every this, every that. And we had lunch. Wimber took us all for lunch. And he said to John, "Well, John, your time at St. Michael's is over. Nearly finished. What are you going to do?" Now, we were curates at that point. He was a curate. I was wife of a curate. The lowest form of ecclesiastical life. And Wimber thought this was terribly funny. He said, "Well, what will you do next, John?" And so John said, thinking he was funny, "I thought I'd come to California and be your curate." Ha, 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 laughing at his own joke, doesn't remember anymore. I remember clearly where we were, and Wimber looked at him, he poked him in the chest. He said, "John, my offer to you is always going to be open." John doesn't remember it to this day. I remember it went into my heart, and I thought, that's our future. I don't know what it's going to look like, how it's going to happen. That's what it's going to be.
Amazing.
And so we finished off at Chester Square, and we went out to California. We had just James at that point. And we went for a few weeks. He said, "Come over, learn all you can, take everything we've got. There's nothing that we wouldn't love you to take with you, and go back into the Anglican Church and just do the stuff there." But somewhere deep inside, we knew that wasn't quite what this was about. We were sure that somebody needed in this country. And people at that stage, this was mid-80s, they were doing some of the worship, they were trying to do some of the healing, we were doing bits and pieces, but nobody had done the whole thing. And John said, wouldn't it be wonderful to put it all together and start doing a church like that? But Wimber had no vision for it. He said, no, I don't think that's for me to do. I'm for renewal. I'm not for church planting outside North America. So we just did our time.
You were there for almost 2 years.
We were there for 19 months in the end.
And what was it? That must have been quite difficult because you're in the tension there because you're thinking that God has called you to come back over here and plant the vineyards in the UK, and yet Wimber, who said no. You've decided you're putting yourself under his authority.
Absolutely.
And he said no. So what was that like, and what changed in the end?
It was unnerving. We knew what we knew, and we decided to keep a note of everything we felt God was saying to us. We had prophecies, I had dreams, random strangers coming to us, verses from the Bible, encounters, all sorts of things. Every time the Lord spoke to us about doing the vineyard in this country, we kept it to ourselves, and I wrote it down. And then after 14 months, we went to a board meeting, because John was now working as a sort of assistant to Wimber in the church planting department, which was very small at that stage. And Wimber said to him, John, I want you to write me a paper about why we should plant churches internationally. So John wrote a paper. Wimber delivered it as if it were his own, which is what he did. And at the end, Wimber said to the board, do we think the Lord is speaking? And they said, yes, we do. And he said, I think the Lord has spoken. And I think we need to let these Mumfords go. Because until then, every time we had visitors come in, which was all the time at Anaheim in those days, Wimber would take us along with him. He treated us so royally. Then he would say, this is John and Eleanor Mumford. The Lord seems to be joining them to the vineyard, but he said, they are a constant embarrassment to me.
I think it's probably worth saying, from my understanding, Wimber's reasons for that was because he didn't want a situation where America ran the world. He was trying not to be imperialist and therefore keep whatever church planting vision God had given them within the States.
Exactly that. And yet he'd been doing renewal, and churches were getting planted like mushrooms through no fault of anybody. They just were happening. And in New Zealand, they planted churches there because Wimber went to New Zealand, and suddenly people started planting churches and calling them vineyards. It was all slightly sort of help what's going on. And Lloyd Rankin, who was leading the vineyards in New Zealand, he said to John, we're family. When are you going to acknowledge us, or are you going to keep us as your bastards?
Wow.
That's not something my John would ever have said. But, what do you expect with the Antipodeans, That's what they do. They just call it like it is. And Wimber felt the Lord had spoken to him.
They say it like it is.
They really did. And so we were all legitimized.
Wow. And how did he pray for you? You told me that he prayed something along the lines of, we've tried our best to stop these people from doing this. Yes. But you have seemed to have told them that it's you.
That's what he did.
Yeah.
He took us back to his room with some of the board. He ordered champagne, which he's never done before or since. He didn't drink himself. And they prayed for us.
Wow.
And he prayed, Lord, we put every obstacle we know how to do in the way of these two. And every time it's come up it's time that we realized it, and we're blessing them to go back. And then they all came forward, as these vineyard people do, to sort of crowd in and lay hands on you. And Carol barked at him, don't touch them. The Lord is doing it himself.
Wow.
Which was nice. And
how precious.
And then we did. 19 months later, we came back. It was just John and me, the team. John, me, James was 6, and Marcus was 6 months. He'd been born in Anaheim. And we came back, and we had an omnicord, which we used as our main means of worshipping.
Does anyone know what an omnicord is? Look it up on Google.
It's a relic.
It's like an electric auto harp.
That's what it was. Yeah, and it just says D, and you put D in it, and then you do the... And I just followed the chords in the book. And it was ludicrous. It was ludicrous how much the Lord turned up whenever we plugged it in.
So you basically chopped everything in, kind of cut ties with the Anglicans, went under Wimber, came back here eventually with his blessing. Did you have a plan B? Did you ever think, what if this doesn't work?
No, we didn't.
What will we do?
We'd done a church. Wimber said, produce a church planting plan. He was a fantastic planner. He was utterly pragmatic. I need a plan. I need a 5-year plan. What are you proposing to do? So John, of course, who was hugely systematic and thorough, he put together a remarkable paper. I think it was about 70 pages long of what he thought God was saying, why, blah, 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 blah. And then I added in the appendix, which was the 33 occasions on which we felt God had spoken to us. And we presented it to Wimber.
Amazing.
And he said, I'll go with this. But he said, the plan, John, is fabulous. You've done it beautifully. But he said, the thing that really, really hits us is the 33 instances. And he said, we have never had as much guidance for anything we've done than God has given to you. So we were blessed, beyond blessed.
That's wonderful.
It was wonderful. There was no alternative.
Did you ever have to look back at that to remind yourself that this was the Lord?
I think once we were off, we were off.
You were off. Amazing.
And Wimber said he was very generous to us. He gave us our airfares and he gave us enough money for a month. That was it. And he said, and if it's the Lord, the rest will come.
Wow.
Which again is pretty scary. So
Wow.
First months were
Amazing.
very scary.
And you obviously started Southwest and Vineyard.
Yep.
How many people here have been part of Southwest at any point? A few of us. Yeah,
Look at
great.
that.
Amazing.
Look at that.
And I'm interested because obviously from there, that church then planted out a number of churches. So in a sense, you weren't just starting a church.
No.
You were starting a movement. And I imagine that must have, part of that 5-year plan must have been to train and release other leaders and release other church plants. I mean, off the top of my head, I don't know all the stats, but off the top of my head, Oxford, Sutton, Bristol, Southend, this church, Winchester, later on Trent,
Edinburgh, one of the Scottish ones.
Looking back, what was it? How intentional were you being about planting, and what did that feel like?
Oh, very.
Planting others whilst also still planting and growing.
Yeah.
The church must have been busy.
Well, John, it was very busy. Wimber said to us, to my John, when they prayed us out, he said, I want you to go home and build me a big church and build me a church that will plant other churches. That was the thing. It's got to be a church planting church. So from the very word go, we were on the look. And it was a season, a remarkable season in the late 80s, and God would send us extraordinarily gifted young leaders. I mean, David and Alison Flowers from Leeds turned up on the doorstep, and they'd just driven all the way down from Leeds because they felt the Lord said, go to London and find out what's going on. Hugh and Ginny Cryer, of course, known famously here, they turned up on the doorstep of our flat, the house we borrowed in Hammersmith, and we opened the door, and there they were, all smiley and lovely, Ginny with the biggest Bible you ever saw. It could have been in a wheelbarrow. And bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, they said, the Lord was speaking to us this morning. We read our scriptures, and he said, go to the city, it'll be told you what you shall do. And on the strength of it, they turned up on the doorstep. So, these things were sovereign. There was somebody else who was riding his bicycle through North London, and it was raining, and he jammed on his brakes, and there was a bus in front of him, he jammed it up. He looked on the bus, and it just said Merton Park. There is no bus in Harrow that goes to Merton Park. It was just sovereign. And these stories were happening over and over. And with each story and each couple that came, we would say, Lord, what is your plan for them? What do you think is going to happen with them? It was just so fun. God blessed us. We had good people.
Wow. Amazing. And just moving forward a little bit, because we don't have loads of time. That was obviously a long time ago. Since... I don't know how many years ago did you hand over to John Debbie?
2015, nearly 10 now.
Nearly 10 years. And since then, your role has become a global role with the Vineyard around the world. Can you just tell us a little bit about what you're doing and give us a bit of a perspective? Because, it's pretty easy for us to enjoy our church and think about what we're doing here. But I don't think we often think about what the Vineyard looks like around the world. And you guys obviously have the privilege of being involved with that. Tell us a bit about that.
We do. Basically, the Vineyard is alive and well in, I think, about 91 nations around the world. Of those, only 16 have fully developed associations like the AVC in this country, or in America, or Canada, or South Africa, or Himalayas, Brazil, Chile, New Zealand, Australia. There are only Himalayas, I think I said, there are 16 fully fledged movements. So out there are an awful lot of other churches. We've just discovered there's a group of about maybe 60 churches in Indonesia calling themselves Vineyards. Another 40 in Mozambique. I mean, these are all popping up like mushrooms, which at one level is wonderful, largely through the work of partnerships, many of them American, some of them ours. And that's wonderful, but it's also scary. Because when it comes to reputational management and oversight of the churches and care for them, all the protections that we need for work like this, that's the sort of work that we're on, and that's what keeps John awake at night, trying to manage. So we see our work with all these different nations and a little bit of traveling. We see our work. We keep saying to them now, to all the leaders that we meet together, we have a freeway ahead of us. We have many, it's multi-lanes, lots of different lanes. It doesn't matter which lane you're in. You could be slow lane, growing slowly. You could be a fast lane, can't see them for dust. You could be chugging along in the middle. It doesn't matter. What does matter is that you have safety on either side. You need a hard shoulder and you need a central reservation. And that's what we spend a lot of our time doing, is putting in safety. And this is who we are, and this is what we're for, and this is how we do it. We quote often that thing that Don Williams, a wonderful theologian, part of the Vineyard very early on, he would talk about the sacred trust. God has given us a sacred trust. You've heard us talk about it. We're not the biggest church. We're not the best. We're not the newest kids on the block. But we are who we are, a vegetable in the stew, and God has given us a sacred trust. And I see it like the ring, Frodo and the ring. It's ours and it's to be protected. And because I'm with a Vineyard group, I can say the Vineyard is something very, very remarkable. We have all our ups and downs. We have headaches and challenges. We have people that do well and people that don't. But it is a very remarkable way of doing church. And I don't want to be presumptuous, and I don't want us to be complacent, but I do want us to be aware of the extraordinary level of blessing that God has given us, and what a very sweet thing he has given us to steward in our generation, and my generation, your generation, and way, way younger, like you.
Amazing. Thank you.
That's what we do.
It's a treat, isn't it? I've got 5 more minutes or so to ask you a couple more questions. I'm going to change tack again. It's been said by many of us that one of our Vineyard phrases is everyone gets to play. Joe and I, in our own story, found that being in a vineyard was somewhere where we were encouraged to get involved, to get stuck in, to try new things. For us, that meant in the area of kids and worship and youth and all sorts of stuff. Most of us, I imagine here, will be the sorts of people who play an active role in our churches, not just showing up on Sunday, but making things happen. I imagine many of us are quite busy with church, and I imagine many of us are doing that as well as working other jobs. And I'm just, arriving early, staying late, stepping up to lead things. And I'm imagining you've had your fair share of busyness around church. And my question is, how have you and John managed to balance the busyness, the urgency, if you like? I mean, there are always people who need stuff, or God is always doing something, or if you're the sort of person who's willing to serve, there's always something to do. How have you balanced that with just preserving, strong marriage, family, children, friendships, that kind of stuff? How have you found a balance in ministry over the probably, is it 40 years or 50 years of ministry you've been doing?
Well, funny enough, actually, all those bases I'm just going to cover in this little session right here.
Oh, brilliant.
I mean, that is so
in that case,
choreographed by the Holy Spirit. Because
there you go.
The sort of thing we want to talk about. But basically, you're talking about life, work balance and all that. I think we've been very fortunate. I think we love each other madly, so we have a strong marriage. We adore our boys. We're mad about the grandchildren. We have a very high view of family. We have a very high view of time off. Not terribly good at taking it always, but we're pretty high on that. And we love lovely things as well. We love beautiful things. We love eating good meals together. We love good wine. We love beautiful music. We enjoy special films. We love the countryside. All the things that are life-enhancing and God-given, we take to be God-given. And we enjoy that. And I think we've got better at it over the years. And I think I'll be saying in a minute, between us, we've now clocked up over, we think, about 120 years of pastoral ministry.
Wow.
Between us. Isn't that mad?
Amazing.
Bonkers.
Amazing.
Bonkers. But still loving it as much as ever. Walking in here this morning, albeit a little late, as you were so sweet to point out, I did feel terribly welcome. And you knew me by name. And I parked very badly. In a spot that had been left by one of your people for me.
Yeah, amazing.
So all of that, but joking apart, I came in and I looked round and I thought, dear Lord, look at all these people. This is so wonderful. You know, we don't presume on it, but here you are. And here you wonderful people, every one of you. I mean, the Spirit of God is here. He's brooding, he's hovering. He comes and he goes and he just takes such pleasure in being with us. And I just feel his pleasure. You know, was it that line in Chariots of Fire? When I run, I feel his pleasure. Well, when I run, I don't feel his pleasure. I feel it's more life-sustaining, get me past here. No, I just feel, as I come in here, and I turned around and looked at you this morning when you said hello, and I just felt his pleasure, and his pleasure over you. Every one of you, you could be doing something else. Gorgeous day, free lunch, that's nice. But, you know, lovely day.
Most people here paid for it.
Did they pay for it? Well, there you go. No wonder you enjoyed it. You pay for what you value. How hilarious.
Amazing. I have one more question, and that's this. So as I get older, I realise that the best thing I can do for my wife, for my family, for the church that I lead, and for the friends that I have, the thing that I can invest my time in more than anything else and prioritise for more than anything else is just to stay close to God and to continue to cultivate my friendship with Jesus and to put that at the centre of everything, to stay vital and connected. I want to do it anyway, and I also don't want to be one of those leaders that messes up in the last 10, 15 years of their life. But I want to do it anyway because it's the way to sustain. And I just wondered, as we close this section, if you've got any tips on what you do. I mean, everybody has a different way of connecting. What is it that you guys do in terms of practices or habits or just top tips, just to stay close to Jesus in the midst of everything else that's going on?
We refer to him all the time, so he's just there. You know, we'll talk about him or to him. We read the Bible together every morning and we pray, and we love the scriptures. We're Bible people. We've always been. We were full of Bible before ever we met the Holy Spirit. We love the scriptures. They're more wonderful than ever. I think I feel, as I look at... this is a little tiny anecdote. We had a couple come for lunch with us last week. John and I had known them for 40 years. We'd not met them for probably 38. We met them again in Devon. They are past Anglican clergy. And they've been serving the Lord below the radar probably for decades. And they came and had lunch with us last week. And when they left, John and I said, that's what we want to look like. Faithful, rejoicing, full of the joy of the Lord, going through suffering, just being real and honest and true, and left foot, right foot, walking with Jesus. There's nothing more attractive. And the older I get, and the more I look around and see many of the people that started all this stuff with us, aging too, it can be a very beautiful thing to be able to age and walk with Jesus that long and that consistently. So whatever you're going through, hang in.
Amazing. That will do for now, but why don't you just join me in thanking Ellie. Thank you so much for your time. Amazing. Thank you. That's wonderful. We'll just do a 2-minute comfort break.